Our gospel lesson this morning is from the Gospel of Mark. We are in chapter 2, and it's 2:23 through 3:6. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And he answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. And then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.'" And another time Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, and so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." And then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. And then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. This is the reading of the word of our Lord. You may be seated. Most of us have healthy attitudes about work, but some of us kind of get our priorities wrong. I entitled this Work, Rest, Play, Worship. The sermon today is about life balance, if you will. How do we juggle each of these parts of our lives so that nobody is neglected? It's really hard. In fact, I would say for pastors is one of the hardest, because when you're supposed to have dinner with your spouse and somebody calls because they're in the emergency room or they had a death in the family, guess who loses out? The spouse, most of the time. It's a tough gig being the spouse of a pastor, and I'm sure that Malcolm and Rhonda know that very well, because they get neglected a lot of times for the job. You see, pastors, we need to feel important, and we need to keep everybody happy. And so, being in demand is it's what we do. We respond to the demands, and some people get left out over it. When I was working on my final degree, one of the things that we were required to do is write papers. And these papers were very involved. Usually we had like a month to write the paper from the time it was assigned. But in the case of this particular paper I was writing, I had agreed to be the attendant, chaperone, I don't know what my other roles were, but for my parents on a cruise they had planned. My mother was in a wheelchair, and she needed help. And Dad was not really able to give her the level of help that she needed, and so they asked me to come along to help with my parents. That meant that from the time the paper was assigned to me, I had 2 weeks to finish it. These papers were 25 to 30 pages. They had 30 to 45 references required. These papers were a lot of work, And I went into panic mode. The day before I was supposed to leave, with my parents, I spent 24 hours straight trying to get this paper finished. I had so much anxiety that my stomach was upset the entire day, and so I kept taking another Tagamet, because my stomach was upset. And then I took another one, and then I kind of lost track of how many I took because my stomach was still upset. The result was the night before I was supposed to go with my parents on this cruise, I was in the emergency room at the hospital. Turns out if you take enough Tagamet, it makes your heart go arrhythmic, and I was a total mess. Now here's a pastor that's supposed to know about life balance, right? How to balance work and play and worship and rest. You're supposed to know how to do that. I didn't do it well at all. In fact, I've struggled my entire life with it. And as you know, most of the sermons that I give, I'm preaching to myself. Yeah. And this would definitely be one of those. Now, here's the thing. I could have spent just a few minutes thinking this through, like, what's the worst that could happen if I don't get this paper done? Well, they were pretty lenient there. I could have asked for an extension. Then I'd had all kinds of time to get the paper done. I've had to do that a time or two in my academic career, ask for an extension. The paper wasn't actually due for another 2 weeks. I just imposed the time limit on myself that I had to get it done before I left. I didn't get it done before I left. As it turns out, sitting on that ship was a really calming place to be, and I had plenty of time to finish my paper. They had Wi-Fi. I sent it off to the professor when I got it done on board the ship. I don't know why I didn't think of that beforehand. Instead of loading up on pills that made me sick because I was already sick. We've talked past years about how God created work for us because he knew we needed it. But he created something else that he knew we needed, and that was Sabbath. Here's a pastor writing a term paper. Guess what the subject of the term paper was? Sabbath. Yeah. Yep, writing a paper on the Sabbath. And I wasn't managing my own rest well at all. There's a lot of us that find our identity in our work. And so we spend all of our time and all of our resources involved around our careers. We do that because we want to be respected. And the highest value in the U.S., at least for us baby boomers, I'm not sure it's true for subsequent generations, but for us boomers, it was to work hard. In fact, if the employer demanded 8 hours, you gave them 10, for no pay, because that would bring you respect. You'd be climbing the ladder. We do it because it helps us to gain confidence. Sometimes we do it because it helps us to gain wealth or power. And sometimes we do it just to escape all the other parts of our lives. I have to admit, when I had problems at home, guess where I went? To the church. Yep. Went to my office, sat there, and it was my calming place. But who was neglected? Family, of course. I looked up work in the Bible. There are 555 references to work in the Bible. I looked up rest in the Bible, and there were 508 references to rest in the Bible. I looked up worship in the Bible, 495 references to worship. Play was the one that got the least, but I'm not sure I translated well with play, so I'm not going to say that it's accurate. 125 instances that I came up with for play. You know, God wants us to be good at all of these because He knows we need all of them. We need to find balance in our lives with all of these things, especially pastors. But you know what? Anyone who is a servant, teachers get caught up in it. Caregivers, hospital people, doctors get caught up in it, where all of their time goes to their career. Even firefighters and policemen and lots of disciplines that get caught up in this. Work is life, and there's nothing else. And so we have dedicated our time. In the case of work, we dedicate it to our employer. In the case of rest, we dedicate it to ourselves. In the case of play, I would say friends, family, we dedicate our time to them. And in the case of worship, we dedicate our time to God. Now, every one of those, the employer, ourselves, our friends and family, and God, deserves a piece of us, right? They deserve a piece of us. And we need to be there for them. Exodus 20, 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But He rested on the seventh day, and therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Pastors work on Sundays. Now, traditionally, at least in our denomination, we think of Sundays as Sabbath, and some denominations think of Saturday as Sabbath because it's the seventh day of our modern calendar. But I've learned, because of my personal discipline, that Sabbath can be any day and any time, and you gotta have it. Now, God says set 1 day a week aside as Sabbath. Typically, pastors set 1 day a week aside, and before I was retired, I took Fridays off with the hopes that, I didn't have funerals and weddings on Saturdays, so that meant I could have 2 days in a row sometimes by taking Fridays off. Some pastors, take Mondays off. Some workaholics take no days off, right? Not only are they neglecting themselves when that happens, but they're neglecting their families and they're neglecting God. We need the holy in our life, and that's worship. We need the rest in our life, and that's Sabbath. You can have Sabbath every day. You can take that 5 or 10 minutes each day and have Sabbath. You can have your worship can come that way too, through devotions, and in fact it should. It doesn't take an hour and a half on your knees. Give God 5 minutes. Just promise Him 5 minutes each week, and you will be worshiping. And who benefits from that? You do. Yeah, you do. You benefit from prayer. You benefit from worship. You benefit from rest. You benefit from engaging the holy. And yeah, you benefit from work if you keep it in context. You benefit from all of those things. Jesus broke the Sabbath in our passage. At least according to the Pharisees he did, right? Yeah, he ate. No eating on the Sabbath. Kind of what they were saying. He went out and in that time the first few rows in the wheat field were for the passerbys. I mean, they were deliberately planted just for the people on the road. In Indiana, we used to have farmers that would leave a couple of rows of corn unharvested right along the edge of the trees so that the deer would have something to eat. I always thought that's kind of cool. But this is for people. And they would take the wheat in their hand and they would rub it like this, and they'd blow like that, and the chaff would fly off, and they were left with just the wheat kernels that they could eat. Now, it didn't sound like much of a meal, does it, to eat raw wheat that way? But it was better than nothing, and it was food. And he was being criticized because they went into the field to get some wheat to eat. It's kind of like telling us you're not allowed to make a sandwich on Sundays. No sandwiches on Sundays, not allowed. Pharisees were really into their rules, and they were way more into their rules for other people than for themselves. Yeah, they didn't have to follow the rules because they were Pharisees, but they wanted everybody else to follow the rules. So here's the thing I want you to know about Sabbath, and we don't have a lot of time today, and I have a good 45-minute sermon here. Maybe I'll do a part 2. We do that sometimes. The thing about Sabbath is that Sabbath is for you. Remember what Jesus said? Sabbath was made for who? For us. We weren't made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for us. Why does Jesus bring all these rules into our life? Because it's good for us. He didn't ask us to do anything that's bad for us. He asked us to do the things that he knows will sustain us in the long run. And Sabbath is one of those things. So, Rhonda, she likes to go out and get on her knees and dig in the dirt. I do not understand that fascination whatsoever, although when she asks, I'll take a shovel out there and move something for her and dig a hole for her or do something like that. But yeah, mowing the lawn. Some people get some find joy in that. I've never understood that either. No. Do what builds you up on the Sabbath. It's not that you can't do anything. If I weren't allowed to do anything on the Sabbath, it wouldn't help me. It would make me crazy, okay? So I got to do something. But God's saying, okay, 6 days a week you can do for others. You can do what needs to be done. You can do what you don't really like doing because it needs to be done. But on the seventh day, that 1 day a week, do something that builds you up, that restores you, that renews your spirit. Then you have Sabbath. And you know what? For me, it's making a sandwich, yeah. God bless.